This is Andrea.
Hello.
And I'm Ryan. And we are the co-owners, operators of both Fable Farms, Indiana, one of only two certified, item registered food waste composting operations in the county. And also EarthKeepers Bloomington Compost, which is the hauling and collection side of the compost system. But you're going to learn a whole lot more about the compost system as a sector, as a whole system, very soon. Here's just a little bit about us. This is us at our first farmers market booth when we were selling compost. We also have a giant flock of chickens, about 110 chickens right now. So we sell eggs and also bagged compost at the farmers market. We took a break this year and last year because of a number of reasons, as people might guess, but this was us in 2019. And here's just a little bit of an overview of the show. This is a little bit of everything. We are really committed to the community. That's very much why the benefit corporation designation really fits us. Because as you heard in the introduction, Andrea has already been incredibly active in the sustainability community of Bloomington and Monroe County, even while she was a PhD student. I myself followed a similar path. I actually came here to study political science. I was a foreign language area studies fellow. I worked under Eleanor Ostrom. She passed away in 2012. I ended up leaving in 2014, but we left so that we could pursue our community sustainability work and end up building this farm that turned into a compost facility that needed a collection fleet to get all that food waste to the facility and start driving down that needle on greenhouse gas emissions, specifically methane when we're talking about organics. But also drive up the availability of local resources for local farmers, which can also drive up our supply of locally created food. So here's us just, celebrating some of our stuff at our EarthKeepers booth at Lotus in the Park, which is one of our favorite events. In the lower left, we have us presenting to the Bloomington Garden Club. In the lower right, that's with the Food Policy Council at one of our annual events, and that's an organization that I ran for about 4 years here in Bloomington as well. And then on the top left, you see one of our main collection vehicles doing its thing at Cook Group, which is our largest corporate client, and we'll get to some of that more in a minute as well. Here's just some more tips from the farm. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, so our farm we have a micro farm, and we're trying to fit it all. We have, as Brian said, we have a flock of chickens. It varies between 100 and 150 at the time of the year. And the chickens are a really important part of our operation. In fact, they're kind of like our little soldiers. We call them our Oompa Loompas sometimes.
Oompa Loompas of the farm.
And so you can see the chickens helping us digest all of the clean food waste that we bring in. You can also see an image of our little bobcat turning our piles. And what you see there is the heat of the compost, cooking. We call it cooking. It's not really cooking, but that's the terminology we very scientifically use. And on the bottom left, you can see our windrows last year, this is last fall. And I wish I had a picture of this year to compare, because we've grown a lot. Every year since we started in 2018, we've doubled our production. And so this year, our compost pad is just almost 3 times as full as it looks here. And then on the bottom right, you can see just an image of one of our farm beds. And so we also in the back, we have an orchard. And as I said, it's just a tiny farm, and we're trying to do it all. We have a greenhouse, which is not shown here, but yeah, we do all sorts of specialty crops.
So we're local environmental organizers through the Center for Sustainable Living and the Bloomington Food Policy Council. But for us, the food aspect of this and the resource aspect of this is something that we wanted to bring into our lives. So we really wanted to go beyond food advocacy and get into the food growing system. So for us, this actually all started out of need. When we bought our farm, we broke the bank. And so it came with a high tunnel. In fact, one of the first high tunnel greenhouses in Monroe County. But the person who owned the place before us, they hadn't farmed it in like 2 years, and they just left this high tunnel greenhouse buttoned up. Well, that creates really bad dynamics internally inside the high tunnel, and it essentially strips the soil of water and nutrients. Weeds wouldn't even grow in our soil. So in our precious brand new farm that we had just broke the bank to get, we realized that our greenhouse wouldn't even grow weeds, let alone anything else. And so we talked to local farmers, like, what do we need to do to fix this? They're like, you need tons of compost. I mean, that's really the best way to remediate your soil and get it producing fast. And we're like, okay, where do you get it? Who's good around here? And they're like, no one. And there's too much trash, or it's not organic, or it's just not clean or quality enough. So a lot of farmers locally import their compost from Michigan or Wisconsin. And so we're like, oh, okay, how much does that cost? Let's check out the bill. When we saw the bills that they were receiving, half of the cost was just the transportation and the shipping alone. I can only imagine what that would be now, given our lovely shipping crunch. But we knew right away, for us, that was not affordable. We could maybe pay for the compost, but we could never pay for the shipping. So we realized that we just had to put our science heads together and figure out how to do this. And figure out how to become composters and, budding, soil scientists of a sort. But that's a long trajectory for us. So that's just a little bit of the background of us and how we started, and how it started with us wanting to be farmers and contribute to the local food system and live our sustainability ethos that we have been doing community organizing around for many years in Bloomington. But so as we got deeper into making compost for ourselves and potentially others, we started to realize what a huge problem food waste is. I mean, it's wasted money, and it's wasted resources of all kinds, and it's a huge driver for climate change. As many people are familiar with Project Drawdown, when the book was first published, I mean, reducing food waste was listed as the #3 most effective way to fight climate change now, and that has maybe even gone up given recent research. So this is just going to be a brief overview of the waste system generally. I mean, we're going to go, from the country to the state to the county and the city. So this is just some stuff. I mean, about the country, the average American produces 4.9 pounds of waste every single day, which is, almost doubled from the 60s. But as of 2017, at least a little over half of that waste gets at least half of that waste was landfilled, and half of it was either recycled or composted, or a little ickier, incinerated for energy recovery. So we are like doubling our waste, but we're having what's being landfilled, so about the same as being landfilled now as in the 60s or late 50s. So it's push and pull, and for steps forward we also have steps back. So it's a complicated problem, but this is just an overview of the breakdown of what waste is like in our society today, now, and over the last 60 years. So as you can see, also food waste, plastics, and paper products make up more than half the garbage in the US. Well, food waste and paper products are compostable. Many paper products are recyclable, and so are our plastics. But we'll get to that in a second, because when we zoom in on the more local picture, it also suggests ways that we can take action. Looking at the national picture sometimes can be overwhelming, and at least this slide is for me. This slide is a little bit less overwhelming, at least it's prettier, but it also contains most of the data that we just broadcast for you there. So you can see that, yes, we've increased our waste overall, from this point, but a lot of that, look at all that's being either, recycled, composted, or combusted for energy, which is of course also questionable, but it is what it is. And so, yeah, we're actually a little bit lower than we were in 1960, just a little bit. But this is what waste composition is looking like nationally. Also, I'm sorry, I keep looking up and to the right. I'm not used to having a camera at the bottom of the screen, so my apologies. I will address you now from now on. So which states are adding more trash to landfills per capita? Well, unfortunately, Indiana is one of them. A lot of this has to do with industrial waste, and industrial manufacturing of various kinds. And so since Indiana has a lot of industrial production, then we also have a lot of industrial waste. We also accept waste from neighboring states. So, definitely talk to your policymakers about that if that's something that you have an issue with. But collective action gets the goods, and it starts with educating people, getting on the same page so that we can collectively act and work on our policymakers to maybe make some change. But in the meanwhile, while we are waiting for that larger state battle to take place, we do also consider the data still. I mean, look, food waste is the largest, single type of thing that we throw away into our landfills. And given that, a ton of food waste produces, I think, a quarter ton of methane after about 120 days. That's a big problem because methane has about 25 times the climate forcing potential of carbon dioxide. So getting a handle on that methane and getting a handle on this element of what's landfilled is very important for us in the now, not just the future. This slide just represents that, yeah, there's a lot of credible research agencies that are looking into this food waste problem. I mean, you'll see that there are different years from these different studies, and the billions of pounds of food wasted vary. Methodologies vary. This is just to show that we have a lot of good research going into this. And overall, the overall picture from this is that our food waste is a problematic issue. And it doesn't even make sense once you get into how much energy we put into creating the food calories that we get out, and how much of even what we produce from that really bad equation is also food that's wasted. I think about 2% of all the energy generated in the United States goes into food that is wasted, not just all the food system, but the food that's wasted. So we'll get into those energy metrics here in a second. So like we noted, landfills are one of the US's largest methane sources. Landfills account for around 20% of all emissions. And, a lot of that is thanks to organics, because as I mentioned, a ton of organics creates a quarter ton of methane emissions. And like I mentioned, methane emissions are about 25 times more potent in climate forcing potential than CO2. So this is a big driver. This is a big problem. And this is something that we can all help take responsibility for. Hopefully before the end, I'll be able to mention extended producer responsibility policies that are helping plastics recycling in places like Maine, but how extended producer responsibility doesn't really extend to food waste, given that you choose how much food you waste by how much you buy, how much you choose not to cook, and how much you think is gross when you're done eating it. So otherwise, in 2018, a waste composition was done in Monroe County. This is where we get to the local action. We needed the local data to be able to assess local action potential. In 2018, we got it. So in 2018, Monroe County, or the Waste District of Monroe County, which is an intergovernmental district comprised of representatives from County Commission, County Council, City Council, the mayor's on it, and we have a handful of administrators just because these special districts perform special functions in our communities. Anyway, they spent a lot of money hiring a wonderful consultant, Kessler Consulting International, out of Florida, who specializes in waste audits and waste stream analyses and other econometrics that go with waste facilities. Because there was a hunch that there was something funky was going on in the waste stream in Monroe County. So we hired KCI, and KCI came out and did 2 studies in 2018. The first was a waste audit that was coupled with an analysis of what types of recycling or composting facilities the county could or should create here. And then the second one was done specifically only on food waste because they found out it was such a problem. They found out that food waste accounts for 39%, 40%, approximately 40% of the entire waste stream of Monroe County. So 40% of that waste stream is not just food waste, 40% of it is food waste and or potentially compostable waste. So that's a lot. And that's something that we can take immediate action on now. And this really concurs with the data on the US level that people generally throw out about a pound of food per day per person. This is actually really reliable information. We actually use the aggregate data nationally to be able to produce estimates for things like sorority houses. So they tell us how many people they serve, or even commercial kitchens. They tell us how many people they serve, and we tell them about how many pickups a week that they might need.
And it's pretty accurate. Definitely, we can. That's the way we base our estimates and know how many rollers they're going to be needing and how frequently they're going to be needing those rollers emptied. So definitely, we can confirm the data.
Here's a more visual representation of that. So you can see this green portion here, only like 20.3% of the waste stream of Monroe County is food waste, 20.3%. And that makes some sense, right? We have a lot of commercial kitchens here, both from, Indiana University, and then also things like Cook Group, Baxter, IU Health Hospital, and all the restaurants. We're a big foodie town. We have a big foodie scene. So of course, our county's percentage of the waste stream might be a little bit more outsized than other counties. And then other compostables, this 18.5%. These are things like, paper towels that have been soiled with food waste, napkins that have been soiled with food waste, paper plates that have been soiled with food waste.
Pizza boxes.
Pizza boxes are a huge culprit. Don't try to recycle your pizza boxes, compost them, because we can't recycle them. They ruin paper fiber batches, and that's another issue we'll get into in a second. But anyway, these green pie slices, as you can tell, are a major part of our local waste stream. And honestly, it's the larger commercial producers hauled by private haulers that are responsible for the vast bulk of this. Bloomington, when listed, that's the City of Bloomington Sanitation Department providing those services to city residents.
Which does not include apartments, though.
Which does not include apartments of
Four
four units or more. And then IU is everything just internal to IU, Indiana University. And then the district drop-offs, those are just things like the Monroe County Recycling Centers. This was the waste audit conducted on the recycling centers. That also included, that's where you do the rural drop-off. Like if you're like us and live in the county, you use the orange bag program for any of your like garbage trash, and you bring those to the district drop-off places as well.
Also, just a quick parenthesis, if you're interested in looking at the full Kessler document, there's a link right here. I think I shared the slides with Krista. And it's really interesting because they have the same breakdown for each one of these components. So you can see the same graph for the private haulers, which also, as we said, includes the apartment complexes, the restaurants, and so on. So I think it's data worth looking at. It's really interesting.
It is, and their analysis is spot on. They're great consultants. So we see this picture here about how much food waste is going into hyper locally here. Well, let's zoom back out into the food system. Well, it seems to be about the same. So hyper local, we have about 20% of our waste stream is food waste. Now you jump to the aggregate of the US food system total. As you can see, this is very old data. This is slightly updated data. We will redo this slide eventually, but I love this graphic because it really shows production and all the energy that goes into the production versus all of it that's lost, just loss. We lose about 31% of the food supply, and just through the process of getting it grown and or raised to tables. So there's a lot of loss along that vector. And one estimate suggests, like as I mentioned before, that about 2% of the total annual energy use in the US is used just to produce food that goes to waste. Not just food generally, but food that's wasted. So here's another energy. This is the specific breakdown on the energy itself. So the energy used by the system is an indicator of its sustainability, right? So in this, you can see that there are about 13 units of primarily fossil fuel energy that are input for every 1 unit of food energy that is made available. And these stripy lines, that's the food that's consumed. This solid gray box, yeah, that's all wasted. Just like as if packaging and material, all that just wasted. And so, you can clearly see the imbalance in our system as to, what goes into it versus what comes out of it. And also, as we mentioned, Project Drawdown, again, when the book was published, reducing food waste was seen as like the #3 most potent and powerful way to fight climate change. Now, as the research gets updated, as the numbers get updated, this has even climbed in ranking. So we redid this slide just a couple of months ago. So we'll see what we can do with all this about reducing food waste. Now, reducing food waste is the very top. Here's this food waste hierarchy, or food waste pyramid, as we call it. So it begins with source reduction. This means procurement policies. Whether you're managing procurement for like a commercial kitchen or a restaurant, or whether you're just thinking about managing procurement from your own refrigerators and kitchens perspective, overbuying food is really the biggest cause of the food waste. So reducing how much food waste is up front is really, that's the most potent way. So really it's behavioral, it's internalizing certain systems and routines. It's modifying our perspective and taking this seriously, because just being like, oh, well, we can compost it. Well, yeah, that is a partial solution. And yeah, it's we love that partial solution, but it's still just a partial solution. It still is energetically intensive. And so really, to just nip the problem in the bud and get ahead of it from the very beginning, source reduction is really what we're fighting for and fighting to educate people about. And grocery stores, they overstock for over display just because people love that visual. People don't like ugly foods. We've heard it, even now there's companies that sell ugly produce specifically, and that's great, and that helps change the culture as well. But there are varieties of things that just go into like the marketing behavioral dynamics of selling food at a grocery store that also can lead to people overbuying. Also, don't shop while you're hungry. I still do that all the time. So source reduction, really the primary thing to start with. Edible food rescue. So we say, so why can't edible food get to community kitchen or to other food pantries in town? Or can we get edible food, if not to people, then to animals? Because, still, at least those calories that have been produced, they're going directly into, people and animals that need it. So all that energy gets to be turned into, caloric food use for our metabolisms. So if you can't reduce, after you try to reduce your procurement, and whatever you have left over that's edible and good still, that's of a good quality and to give to someone in a dignified manner, or of a quality enough that if you can't do that, you can at least feed it to a hungry animal. Then we go to home composting. And home composting is great because it's also part of culture change, and it's an immediate feedback mechanism for people to get a handle on exactly how much food that they waste. The problem with home composting is that everyone loves the idea. Very few people actually execute it properly. And this has downstream negative effects on our local ecologies and even our backyards. So, if you have a compost pile that you're not turning and not keeping hot, you could be leaking. If you have like chicken or anything like, your meat, bones, dairy in there, you could be leaking salmonella or E. coli into your garden bed. Certainly do not use that kind of compost for growing vegetables of any kind. Including those inputs in your home compost also can attract rats and other pathogenic vectors. We know so many people that have signed up with our service specifically because they started getting rats in their neighborhood because they weren't composting properly. It's hard to keep up with, especially when the weather changes. When it's a rainy day or a cold day, you may think like, oh, wow, I'm great doing my compost at home, but you're not going to want to trudge out there in the snow and actively try to keep this stuff hot. So when the spring rains come and the compost pile in the backyard hasn't been turned for 3 months, all those nutrients get washed into the water system, which make their way down into our watershed, Lake Monroe and Lower Salt Creek. That's why our water tastes funky in the fall, because all that accumulates from spring to fall. And it also can spread invasive weed seeds that don't get composted if it's not actively turned and kept at the right temperature. So there's all sorts of things that can go wrong with home composting. And by and large, our experience has been more people think it's a good idea and a fun sounding thing to do than they can actually commit the personal cost of time and education that it takes to know how to do it properly and go out on the regular and do it. Or you can just pay a low price and sign up for our service on a monthly basis. But that's the only plug I'll really make because it's a safety issue. And we do this professionally because people often don't get it right at home. In the middle, then, we have the small scale decentralized and the medium scale locally based. This is more like what we do. We're medium scale and we're locally based, but we're one of 2 sites in the county, and we actually help with the management and distribution side of the other site. It's a good friend of ours. They've been doing it even longer than we have because they were an excavator and they had to start composting tree waste and all this stuff, but we help out with that. So our system is, 2 poles, not exactly decentralized or centralized. But since one's on the east side of the county and one's on the west side, we kind of get the advantages of having a decentralized system, because anything, west of the center line goes to the west location, anything east goes east. And what you don't end up wanting to do is having, mechanical or biological treatment before landfilling. I mean, yeah, that can remove some of the food waste and prevent some methane, off gassing. But at the end of the day, you're still putting labor and energy and time into this, and anything else that comes above that or before that is preferable. And of course, landfilling and incinerating the food waste is the worst. So what's the solution? Well, of course, the solution is food waste recycling. So yeah, composting systems are they are recycling systems. Community composting systems are community recycling systems that are hyper local. Most of our recycling actually kind of gets sorted here and then trucked away to someplace else. You know, it gets sorted at like a materials recovery facility, and then it gets trucked somewhere else where it's either melted down or compressed and squished and baled and then put on a shipping container that goes to somewhere else. However, those somewhere else's saw that as a problem for a number of reasons, and we're going to get to that in a second. But this is food waste recycling. So thinking about food waste recycling and keeping it sustainable, let's look at our regular recycling. How's our regular recycling systems doing? Our plastic recycling system, for example. Oh, well, the numbers are pretty good. You know, look, I mean, our diversion rates are certainly, you know, have certainly been climbing over the decades. You know, that's a wonderful growth trend. However, I have a little bit of concern about the declining rate of diversion return that seems to be happening here on this graph. Of course, this data is now about 7 years old, so hopefully we can get something a little bit more updated to see if we flatlined or if we're still climbing a little bit, but overall it is flattening a little bit. And the biggest problem with traditional plastics recycling is contamination. I mean, as this slide even notes, you know, municipal recycling programs for years have produced dirtier and dirtier bales of recycling because, you know, trying to max out our diversion numbers, we do things like, oh, let's go to single stream. We know that that maxes, you know, it's so easy for people just to dump all their recyclables into the single stream that of course we'll get more stuff diverted. Yeah, you'll get more stuff diverted, but you'll also get more large batches of recyclables rejected, and not just rejected from China, which we'll get to in a minute, but rejected from any facility, because when they're too dirty with things like, you know, food waste, when recyclables are contaminated with food waste, we can't process them. This is why the greasy pizza boxes are such a thing. This is why it's important for people to rinse out their milk jugs and actually separate, you know, the lid plastic from the bulk plastic. As we've moved towards, you know, programs that make it easier for people, people also get lazy and wish cycle. Oh, this plastic film, well, you know, it's plastic. Is it stamped with something? No. But could it be recyclable? Perhaps. I don't know. It's not my profession. I have to get to work. I'm going to put this in my recycling bin anyway. Well, that's what this looks like. When you put your cassette tape and your iron and your hose and your engine block all in your recycle bin, or when you put your food waste, you know, all up in your recycle bin, it turns to this. You know, I mean, I'm not going to get too far into like foreign policy debates, but at the same time, I can understand why, you know, China being one of the largest, you know, receivers of global municipal solid waste and recyclables, starting to realize that these recyclables couldn't really be recycled because for us, it was so cheap and easy just to toss them in that we stopped doing it properly quite a while ago. So for us, one of the biggest concerns is composting as a recycling system that's local is subject to these same kinds of dynamics. There's a low perceived value. Most recycling programs in the US are free. A lot of them are single stream, and people just dump whatever because they don't care, because it's free and why should I care? And it's someone else's job to take care of it. This ends up having really bad downstream effects for our ability even to recycle or compost. So in 2017, as I noted, you know, China begins this national policy of Operation National Sword, where they no longer accept these super dirty, contaminated bales of plastics. You know, they have, you know, officials and dock workers that check through these bales to make sure that they don't have garden waste, food waste, stuff that's not supposed to be there. I mean, this is now, as of 2021, it is now being enforced with even greater strictures than before. So this absolutely wrecked the international recycling system. It caused major backups in the domestic national recycling system, and it's a hazard that we need to be mindful of, so that we don't let that spoilage affect our organics recycling system.
Oh, what I was just going to say is that it affects us locally, right? Because in the past, the recycling, it's still free to us, but the city used to actually make money by selling that recycling. And now the city actually has to pay for the recycling. So we pay to get our recycling, to get rid of our recycling, and we pay to get rid of our trash. It used to be that the what we would make from selling the recycling could subsidize part of the trash removal, and now we pay for both of them. So it really does have an effect really locally to us, and we'll all see it with the cost of trash removal coming up in our utility bills, like in the city.
Yeah, trash removal and recycling costs are going to go up because, since the 70s or 80s, recycling programs, because recycling becomes new inputs for other industrial processes, these inputs, they're a resource. And so we were able to sell our plastics as a resource when they were clean, and we got money for that then subsidized really cheap garbage collection. So because of these dynamics, we had free recycling and ultra cheap garbage collection. So what do you think the national culture around waste management has become? Oh, it's just garbage. It's just trash. Why isn't this free? Why isn't this super convenient and super free for me? Recycling should be free and garbage should be free or cheap. And in reality, neither is true, just because of the way that these systems they have metabolisms of their own. They require calories of their own. Anything that takes inputs, anything that takes energy, it's going to take employee time. It's going to take machines. It's going to take a little bit, unfortunately, even of fossil fuels to run those machines. And so this isn't just a free magic process. This is something that we're all responsible for. And just like I mentioned previously, like we're starting to get into extended producer responsibility regulations, like in Maine, for example, being a first in the country. And that's because producers make all this packaging waste. Industrial producers, create all of these recyclables that then the consumer is left to sort through, and just they wanted what was inside the box. They didn't want the box itself and the wrapper and all that stuff. And a lot of that's for presentation or just marketability of a product. And so it is just ultimately waste. Whereas again, with food waste, purchasing managers in commercial kitchens are the ones responsible for buying too much food, and you yourself are responsible for buying too much food or wasting it in your home. So again, why some other producer should cover that cost, or even the government should subsidize that cost, it's really open to question and debate. So a solution, composting. Here's an image of backyard composting, which comes with all the caveats we mentioned, but building sustainable local composting systems is really the sweet spot of where it's at. And of course, what is compost but decayed organic matter? A lot of people call like their food waste, well, here's my compost bucket. Well, sure, you can call it that. And in the industry, it gets kind of tossed around very lightly as like, yeah, we're curbside composters. Well, we're curbside haulers, and we haul your bucket of food waste away. And then it becomes compost after we put a lot of staff time, a little bit of fossil fuels in those machines,
and 9 months later,
and 9 months later, sitting at our farm. All of that stuff and all of that work goes into turning it into compost. It doesn't just happen. So varieties of means of establishing community composting systems. Again, backyard home composting, primary, awesome. We really do actually encourage people to do this. We've given dozens of free classes on how to do this properly at your home. But the key point is how to do it properly at home. I cannot tell you how many people with these earth machines, pardon me, have become clients of ours because they just fill them and fill them and fill them, and there's no aeration, no turning, no breakdown. They become clients. These also can, if you don't put like rabbit fencing underneath this, you'll likely get rats under there. These often, again, people will fill all of these to the brim with food waste, and then it doesn't compost. So it's not as easy to do backyard or home composting as people often think. Community scale systems is really what we're about. And what these pictures really show are just diverse ways of doing this. Some communities have, parking lots that just are filled with these pallet-based systems, and people are turning all of this by hand. Some places have bike composting that also get brought to farms. There are a lot of different ways that community compost systems can look, and they're really just tailored to the immediate environment and context of the community itself. The local conditions specify what systems would work best for any given community. Here's a little thing of this is just what industrial composting looks like. This takes, a minute or less.
I'm Paul McGuire from EnviroFit. We run a composting system here at Tuakau, where we take mainly green waste and some food waste, and more recently, a lot more of the compostable packaging that goes with food waste. Basically, the life cycle starts with compostable packaging, would come in with other food waste, goes through a process where it is mixed with sawdust and green waste. It's shredded, goes onto a windrow system for about 8 to 10 weeks. From there, moves to a maturation pile for a while until it matures. And we go through a screening system after that, where it's screened down to a very fine product and trucked out to our customers.
So that's like the really large version, you know, of what we do. But we thought that it would be a fun little picture. This just also shows that's what the large scale stuff looks like. And here's what contamination looks like in real time. Everybody thinks like, oh, wow, you collect food waste, it's going to look like this, you know, fun lettuce and stuff. No, there's like, you know, people forget, and, you know, your plastic ends up in there, your fork ends up in there, and somebody has to pull that out. So that's never fun. But it's this micro system, keeping the whole system local is what's great. So locally, we have a lot of farms in the area that can produce these vegetables that get sold to restaurants and other, you know, commercial kitchens in the hospitality industry, and you know, other, you know, food factories, et cetera, or even to individual citizens who cook and make the food at home and generate food waste. And then the EarthKeepers truck comes around and collects that food waste and brings it to the food waste recycling center, aka Fable Farms, Indiana, where after months and months and lots of work, we turn this into compost that we then sell back to the farmers. So it keeps, this is the cycle part of the recycling. Oftentimes, we don't get the cycled part. We just were like, I'm recycling my plastic bottle. And then maybe 10 years later, it comes back to you as, you know, a t-shirt or something made out of recycled bottles. I don't know. They're not very comfortable in my opinion, but yeah, I mean, it comes back to something, but not, you don't get to see your thing come back as something new for your people around you. Whereas here, when you participate with EarthKeepers, when you do any kind of local composting, when you keep that resource local, you see, oh, I put my food waste in the bucket, and wow, this farmer is going to have, you know, compost to fertilize their new vegetables with, that then I can buy at a cheaper price. This is just another really cute kind of graphic illustrating the circular nature of what the system should be. And yeah, I mean, this is a movement. This is a movement largely driven by social entrepreneurs. And that's what we see ourselves as. You know, we saw a problem that we were having, that the local market of farmers were having, that the local food system was having. And, you know, we knew that it wasn't in the budgetary cards for Monroe County or City of Bloomington to be able to invest millions of dollars in the facilities and the fleets and all the processes, education, training, and programming that goes into this. So we needed to be a stopgap. We needed to be the first to the fight and to just addressing the problem. And so here's a little map conducted, you know, made by the Institute for Local Self-Reliance on just all the different modes of micro-hauling and composting entrepreneurship that's going on. And it's little, you know, benefit corporations like us that are just doing this because they believe in it, that are really leading the way and causing this cultural and economic change. So for us as a small business, you know, we look at this as triple bottom line stuff: people, planet, profit. Y'all are right next to the Kelly School, so I know that this is nothing new to you. And the sustainability tripod, I don't really know how much this still gets integrated into sustainability discourse at an academic or institutional level, but it's a framework that I like. When I was on the Commission on Sustainability here locally, it's something that we use as a lens to analyze all sorts of policies and programs. And that three-legged stool or tripod of sustainability is sustainable economics, you know, sustainable social equity, and sustainable ecological or environmental concerns. And so as a company, you know, as a group, what we like to do is address things through that sustainability tripod lens. You know, for community economics, you know, farmers save money buying their compost locally. They don't have to ship, they don't have to pay that double cost of shipping on top of it. That allows them to grow more food, and more food, you know, allows them to expand their farm stops, expand their farm stands, or even be able to, you know, provide things for things like restaurants. And then when they're providing to restaurants and selling more at farm stands, you know, they can hire more people. You know, they can hire more people to work these living wage green jobs on farms, or even working for EarthKeepers and, you know, as composters. You know, that itself is a living wage green job. We start all of our people at $15 an hour. That's where we start. And we know a lot of the farmers around town are equally as generous. And so equity in the community, creating more jobs and more nutritious local food available for less, it benefits everyone. And then from, you know, an ecological perspective, we already have gone over this. We already know we're capping emissions, we're feeding plants extra nutrition, and we're also stimulating, the soil microbiology and the soil food web to help keep living soils locally. Now, there's two main sets of hazards. The biggest hazard is low perceived value. Because people are so used to free recycling and free garbage or low cost garbage collection, they just think that their waste should be free and they shouldn't be responsible for it. So there's this whole idea of, oh, this is just gross. Oh, I was just licking my fingers after eating this, but now that I know it's going to go to the trash can, it's disgusting and icky, and I can't separate my plastic from my food waste. And can't I just toss it all into the bin? That causes downstream problems and contamination, like your screener or your grinder might catch on fire because someone puts too many forks in because they just didn't want to deal with it. And that's just it. People want someone else to deal with it. Oh, can't you just take this away? Can't the city just handle this for free? Shouldn't this be someone else's problem to deal with? Well, if someone just comes and does this for you for free and you never have to think about it, you're never going to change your behavior about this. In fact, your behavior is just being incentivized by you knowing that, oh, it doesn't matter if I contaminate. It doesn't matter if I do this properly. Someone else is going to come deal with this. It's not necessarily my problem. We have systems that take care of this and make it go away. In fact, it is your problem. In fact, we're all responsible for this. The last one would be like, shouldn't this be free? Why does this cost so much? Well, when you contaminate, you're externalizing the cost of your own laziness onto the producer, because when that fork gets in, because you didn't want to think about it, it goes and catches your grinder on fire, and then a facility shuts down for 6 weeks, and then multiple institutional kitchens can't compost because a few people just thought it was too gross to pick their fork out of their own food waste. So we have these problems where environmentally these problems get externalized to other places. Or locally in our system, you can't outsource your contamination problem in your organics to China. That gets outsourced to us and our buddy on the west side. There's really no way to get around it locally. So a local system really demands more care, attention, and responsibility from the local user base. Then lastly, the second hazard that's really big that we hear a lot about and that we deal with a lot is these disposable compostable polymers. They seem like this miracle cure that, like, oh, sure, well, I don't need plastics. Let's just do compostable polymers. Well, the bulk of them are made in Italy. It's an industrial process. They get shipped on shipping containers all the way here. And really all they do is they sustain this notion of a throwaway culture. So, we like to promote these biodegradable product institute, BPI, compostable polymers to places like Cook Group or large commercial kitchens, because they need transition technologies to get back to the future, by which I mean every commercial kitchen needs to go back to hand washing or dishwashing their stuff. We don't need this disposable stuff because all it does is create an extra waste stream. Because if you throw your compostable plastic into the recycling bin, it's going to turn to goo and ruin all that plastic that's in that recycling batch. If you throw your plastic spoon that you think is a compostable spoon into your compost, it's going to get ground up in the grinder and contaminate your compost. Really, we think they just create confusion and they just incentivize the continuation of a disposable throwaway culture. Also, we can't certify our compost as organic, as the USDA does not certify any compost made with these compostable polymers in it. Our clients for the residential side really demand these green compostable liner bags, very much just for the effect of it seeming more clean, even though we clean the buckets regardless of whether the bag was used or not. It's an experience of cleanliness that doesn't really reflect any actual cleanliness. It just makes the compost not certifiable. But people need what they need, and this is partly a culture change is also partly a marketing game. So we do the song and dance as best as we can, all the while looking in the long term towards transitioning to full sustainability. And then lastly, a lot of these, the USDA isn't wrong. They're not wrong for preventing us from having certification, because it's things like, oops, last year we just found out that these molded fiber bowls that were compostable from Chipotle and a bunch of other places. I think we even carried them in IU Dining. Not so compostable because they can contain PFAS, which is a forever chemical that can give you cancer and a number of other awful things. And also these, the green bags, like, well, I mean, this is made from polylactic acid or from cornstarch. Well, it's not purely that. I mean, these are proprietary chemical mixes that these companies own, and that include things like binding agents that when they compost may leave microplastics or other chemicals in the compost itself, which is why the USDA doesn't buy it, and why for us it is a transitional technology. So we think composting is the future. We think it's a huge part of the answer for climate change, but there's a whole lot of things that everyone needs to get on board with. We need culture change around this to have everybody understanding and participating properly and really taking ownership of this, just like we need to take ownership of all of our waste and for all our responsibility for everything that we do, both with our local ecology and community and in the global environment. So we have these two videos. We're out of time because we want to be able to take questions from you all. But if we end up with a little bit of extra time after questions, we might be able to play them for you. So we're here to take questions. I know I've been talking a lot. Andrea actually has more of this in her head than I do, but I can kind of be a chatty guy.
Yeah, and the videos are linked in the presentation that I sent to Krista. So if Krista, you end up sharing that to everyone, they can watch the videos.
Krista, are you there?
Hi, yes, I'm here. Feel free to drop your questions. Oh, I see we have our first question in the chat, actually.
I don't see. Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to get to the.
Cool.
I'll go ahead and read it off if that's okay for those who may be recording or listening to the recording later. So Kate says, you mentioned that you are able to accurately determine how many pickups someone might need based on the number of people they serve. For Greek housing at IU, what have you noticed, or what is the average cost for a Greek house of about 100 people to turn to composting initiatives?
We do not believe that here is really the appropriate place to give estimates and do kind of cost analyses for the business. We'd be happy to talk with you about how many rollers about per week your sorority or Greek house might need. But for the purpose of this presentation, we'd rather if you just email us, and then we'd love to set up a discussion or a meeting with you because we customize everything. I mean, it's really based on the needs of your kitchen specifically and the people that you're working with specifically. Like we work with the cooks and we work with the house moms. We get into procurement stuff. We do waste auditing. So, you know, we'd love to have that conversation here. And then I also saw Brendan Scholl having single stream service at my apartment complex, but I drive to the local recycling center to recycle my materials to increase the likelihood of it actually being recycled. Yes, Brendan Scholl, thank you so much. Yes.
Yeah, I have to say a lot of people in the city really don't even know that the recycling centers exist and aren't aware of all the categories that things can be separated. When you go to the recycling center, you separate everything. In fact, you separate your glass by colors. And so I do think that it would be really important if more people who live in apartments and don't have access to recycling would start, if this were promoted a little more, because yeah, it's great. So one thing about the sorority, which as Ryan said at the beginning, is one of our oldest clients, is when they started composting with us, they were actually wasting almost double what they waste now. And it wasn't until they started to separate their organic waste that they realized how much was being thrown out. And most of what was being thrown out was not post-consumer, it wasn't coming from the plates of the girls who were serving food and not eating, it was coming from the kitchen. And so the kitchen chefs started to purchase less and make less food and ask the woman, like, are you coming for lunch? And so there are many ways in which the amount of waste can be reduced, and they've definitely successfully, as I said, they've almost cut it in half.
Just by paying attention.
Do you know how many Greek houses on the campus utilize this type of service?
We are currently the only provider of this type of service in the county, and we only have 2 Greek houses at the moment. We did have 3, 1 dropped off last year, but we're trying to grow more.
Any last questions from any of our attendees?
This is more related to personal composting and composting with you all. I just wanted to ask, I have PSM bags, and I wanted to know if those are okay to be composted with your program, because I currently use the district composting bins over at the recycling centers. And I wanted to make sure that those were usable, or if those were bad for you all, per se.
Can you repeat the name of the?
Plastarch Material.
So unless they have a certification, we typically don't accept things. So there are all sorts of certifiers. There's, I think in the US, the one that does most of the certification is the BPI, but there are European certifiers that we've started to see here in the US. There's an Australian certifier. So at the end of the day, just from the materials, we normally cannot tell, and we just have to rely on some certification of the product.
And I'm guessing no. This Plastarch material is a biodegradable thermoplastic resin composed of starch combined with other biodegradable materials. And this is modified in order to obtain heat-resistant properties, making PSM one of the very few bioplastics capable of withstanding high temperatures. So the temperatures really also are part of what helps us break down like the PLA or the cornstarch, like the cornstarch-based materials. But the fact that this is like a resin that you know, while the HL 100 resins are not fully biodegradable or compostable, they do offer a high bio-based content. So I mean, yeah, I mean, we'd have to look at that product specifically and maybe even contact the manufacturer, and we'd be happy to do that for you, because we like to look into like what's out there.
Yeah.
So if you could send us an email, like just like with the picture or like that, or other details on like the name or stuff like that, we would love to look into it.
Yeah, it's kind of like, you know, everybody now knows that when you read something in a food package that says all natural, it doesn't mean anything anymore, right? It's just the term is completely abused. And so in the compost world, anything that says compostable, biodegradable, plant-based, it doesn't mean anything anymore, because we just don't know really how it was made. And so we need these certifiers who go and test it and compost it and analyze the chemical structure of the compost and make sure that there aren't any microplastics or other polymers or residuals that are remaining in the compost that we can't see with our eye but are still there.
Sure.
And that would be, yeah, either BPI, Biodegradable Products Institute certified, or Cedar Grove certified are the two big ones. And then there's the International Standards Organization that has like the ASTM 1300 and 1500 standards, I think. And so one of those three things, or sometimes even all three, will be printed on the label or on the box.
Yeah, and that's interesting because we are starting to see more products in the US that are certified, in Europe, as I said, in Australia. And it's interesting because these certifiers are actually way more strict than the ones that we have in the US. So they're actually looking for things like many of the products that you'll see that are certified will say only compostable in an industrial facility, whereas other products outside of the US, they're starting to certify them so that they're also compostable in a home backyard home compost setting. So yeah, it's really, we just need to look at these certifications.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Thank you for composting.
All right, if there are no final questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up there to be respectful of everyone's time. I just want to extend a huge thank you to Ryan and Andrea for presenting today, to Tom, who hopped off, but he provided our introduction, and to our alumni, students, faculty, and staff for tuning in to listen. You'll receive an email with a super quick, easy survey following the event. Please take a second to fill it out so we can continue improving our alumni offerings. Thanks for joining, everyone, and have a great day.